What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Sheehan Show for Sherdog.com. My name is Sean Sheehan, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. His name is Ian O'Neill. He's the host of the Owl Triangle podcast over on Severe MMA, one of the top Irish MMA journalists at the moment, and he covers all the European scene. So I have him on with me today. We're going to preview some of the upcoming UFC London card. We're going to pick out, I think, 4 fights here we're going to look at. We're going to touch on another few names as well. Just a bit of kind of local insight into this card. And also, if you haven't seen it yet, I think before this, my preview for the upcoming Cage Warriors card this weekend will be out with Brad Martin. And if it's not, it'll be out in the next day or so anyway. So a massive weekend in the world of European mixed martial arts coming up this weekend. And we're here to talk a little bit about UFC London. Ian, thank you very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great, Sean. Not a bother at all. I'm excited for the week's action. It's a hotbed of MMA fights this week, all based in London. So I'm very excited for the Cage Warriors card and for the UFC card that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, me too. I really can't wait, because if you, like, for the last while, it seemed like MMA stopped in London during the pandemic, because we were supposed to have that Cage Warriors card. We were supposed to have the UFC London. Was it Woodley versus Edwards at the time? And none of it ended up happening, and it all went on pause. And it feels like a little bit of normality might be back now this weekend as we get back, and we see a lot of the UK fighters, a lot of the European fighters on this card this weekend. I want to start with probably the biggest name on the card, and I want to talk about Paddy Pimblett, who's taking on Rodrigo Vargas. And we'll get to that matchup in a minute, because I know you have a few thoughts in that matchup. I have a few thoughts in that matchup as well. I've made my thoughts kind of known on Paddy Pimblett, I think, over the last while, and on this podcast and on other ones as well, that Paddy's a very, very talented guy, very good grappler. I think his striking has improved an awful lot, but he has big holes in his game, and it's going to take a lot of improvements to shut those holes and to go to the next level. When Paddy came into the UFC, I think there obviously was a lot of hype, because he's such a character and such a funny guy and all of that, that people maybe who haven't seen his career beforehand don't understand what it might take for him to go to that next level. Now, I'm not saying he can't go to that next level necessarily. We might get into that. But at the moment, where Paddy Pimblett is, could you give people a sense of that, as someone who has watched him coming up on the scene, come up through Cage Warriors, what you think of Paddy Pimblett and his game at the moment?
I think it's exactly as you said it. It's improving. Obviously, he's a top class grappler and always has been, and that's where he's at his most dangerous. We've seen some striking improvements in his first UFC fight in his debut against Luigi Vanderamy. I think, he showcased that he has some killer instinct on the feet when he does hurt his opponents, but he also got clipped as well and was also a little bit hurt in that fight. So he's going to have to be very careful, because you have a very little room for error in the UFC, especially when the fight is standing. So where he's at right now is a fighter that's still developing in my eyes. I think that he's not the finished article yet. I'm very excited to see his progress in the UFC. He's only 27 years of age, so he has many years to garner some more skills, to add some more wrinkles to his game, and all in all, where I see Paddy right now is exactly where he is, and that's starting off in the UFC and being slowly built into the lightweight division, and I think that's the perfect scenario for him right now.
I agree, and I think the matchup this weekend is very, very good, which you'll get to in a second. I think the thing for Paddy as well, just looking at his record here, he is 17-3, so that's 20 fights. We often talk these days, and various places, I'm sure other people talk about it as well, how people are getting into the UFC now, with 3 and 4 and 6 and 7 fights. It's not a thing really anymore where you have to have your 10-fight win streak or your big win outside of the UFC to get into the UFC. Now, Paddy has all of that, and he's somewhat exposed in terms of, all different parts of his game. And that's not a negative term. That is, a factual term, kind of. We've seen him against wrestlers. We've seen him against good jiu-jitsu guys. We've seen him against good strikers. And, the UFC test, as we've seen him in it as well, And I think look, for Paddy as well, there's been lots of injuries in there. and lots of setbacks in different things as well. Obviously, losing to Nad Narimani, losing to Sornbach, the very close fight with Julian Rosa. But what he does have, as you said there, he's a very, very good finisher. That improvement, I think, the last time in his striking, to me, as someone who hasn't been like atop the Paddy Pimblett hype train in terms of his ability, I have in terms of him as a character. I think he's hilarious, even though he's a Liverpool fan, but sure, we can't all be perfect. I think that improvement shows that he can make improvements, and you'll have hope for him in the future, even though I think there's a lot to kind of be, moved along in his future. Sometimes you see guys, right, they get to this level and then they get to the UFC. Like back in the day, there was a lot of it, whether it was Anderson Silva or Conor McGregor and coming into the UFC, 15, 20 fights, and they were ready. When you have that many fights, you should nearly be ready. Even a Marlon Moraes, I was talking about him, last weekend, and I know it's a different sort of level. Paddy is not there. Paddy is not ready. Paddy is not ready to climb to the ranks, especially at the 155 division, and get there. So I think people in America, maybe who haven't seen Paddy Pimblett in the cage war scene, who haven't watched all of his fights, I think you need to slow your roll a little bit here on him. I saw someone recently tweeting, and Paddy retweeted it. Paddy is not just a striker, but a great chin. He's definitely not. He's way more of a grappler, a fantastic grappler. And if he can improve defensively an awful lot, he could be a fantastic, well-rounded fighter who goes a long way. But at the moment, he needs to make those improvements. I think this fight against Rodrigo Vargas is the perfect fight to make those improvements. Watching Vargas, I wasn't that impressed with him. I know you've watched a bit of him as well. What do you think of Paddy's opponent here on Saturday night?
Yeah, I really would fancy Paddy's chances in this fight against Vargas. I mean, on the feet, he's a little bit lethargic. He throws some slow shots. He throws his hands a little bit low. He has a real serious lack of head movement, which, that's going to be open for Paddy to try and get him out of there on the feet, maybe to showcase his striking skills again. But I also think that he will have the advantage on the mat as well if he takes the fight down. And he's all round skills. What you don't want to be doing with Paddy Pimblett right now is, like you said, is throwing him in there with an absolute killer in the lightweight division. I think you throw him in there with the level of guy that Vargas is probably not going to make any great waves in the lightweight division. Has some dangerous aspects of his game. Throws a nasty calf kick. He's tough. He's durable. So, I mean, he's always going to be thereabouts. His fight with Zhu Rong, the young Chinese man, it was his last fight, and, lasted the pace for 3 rounds, showed some good cardio, showed some good toughness, not afraid to go for submissions on the ground. But I do think he's going to be dealing with a much better fighter in Paddy Pimblett this time, and I could see Paddy Pimblett definitely getting a finish in this fight, and I think that's what this fight is being set up for.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I almost everything you said there. I think that one point you made about his kind of Vargas's durability and his ability to stay for 3 rounds, he's a good point. That might be the toughest test for Paddy. I think he's very relaxed in there as well. Something you don't normally see. I think his last fight was his first UFC fight. You very rarely see that as well. So I think that is a very much a plus point for him. But that guillotine attempt he went for in that fight, to me, as a non-expert myself, looked very novice-y to me. Whereas when you see Paddy Pimblett on the ground, it looks high level, and I think that could be a big area for Paddy to exploit in this fight. And as you said as well, I think the striking, I think Paddy can win the striking as well. Now, I don't think by any means Paddy is an expert striker, a brilliant striker, especially defensively. But I don't think Vargas is either. Although the one thing with Vargas is he does counter a bit, which is dangerous against Paddy. So that might be another area. But I think if Paddy's smart as well, he will throw his strikes. If he eats 1 or 2, I think he should get it to the ground. Vargas doesn't have great wrestling either, I think. So, look, I think it's a very good matchup for Paddy. It's a guy with 16 fights. It's a guy with experience. And it's a guy he really should be beating, in my opinion, at this stage of his career, where he needs to be. He needs to be moving forward. Right. We leave Paddy Pimblett at that. I think we both think he's going to win that. I'll have the betting show out obviously this week as well, and I'll be giving some of my bets. The next guy and the next fight I want to talk about is Gunnar Nelson versus Takashi Sato. Sato's taking this on short notice. Gunny was supposed to fight, was it Claudio Silva? I think he was supposed to fight here. This is Gunny Nelson's first fight in September 2019. So he's been a long time out of the cage. He lost to Gilbert Burns in that fight and lost to Leon Edwards in the fight before that. He hasn't got a win since his win over Cowboy Oliveira back in 2018. And he lost to Ponzinibbio before that. So since, 2016 almost, he's only 2 wins in the cage. And for a fighter like Gunny Nelson, who was right up there at the very top of the division for a good while, Gunny was probably ranked for 3 or 4 years in that top 15. It has been a very barren few years and a very tough few years with injury and everything like that. But Gunny is a good fighter, isn't he? He's a well-rounded fighter. I know, you've been on the local scene fighting even amateurs in the local scene coming up, and Gunny's been on Cage Contender and all that. Obviously, we know training here in Ireland, in SBG Ireland. He's actually been back a couple of months ago training here as well. So, with the world opening up again, it's great for Gunny and great for the team here in Ireland as well to be able to train with him. But it's great to see Gunny back. And he's a fighter, when he's at his best, Gunny has a massive upside. He's a good striker, an unbelievable grappler, and going in here against Sato, I think he will fancy his chances. But what are you expecting to see out of Gunny after such a long time away?
It's a good question because after being away for so long, is he going to come back as maybe a little bit of a different fighter? Like he'll always have his like karate based stance. He's always quick coming in and out, and what he's really and truly known for is his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills and legendary Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu skills. I mean, back in the day on the scene, he came over from Iceland, was training in SBG. He was just like this mysterious person who didn't say or do a whole lot and wasn't really that outspoken and was a man of few words. But when he got in there and he got it and was competing in the cage, if he got the fight down to the ground, it was over before anybody even knew it. So if you ask me what I'm expecting to see, I'm expecting to see Gunnar Nelson go in there and make probably as short a work of this fight as he possibly can. And I believe his method of doing that will be taking Sato down and will be using his jiu-jitsu skills to get him out there as quickly as possible. I'm wondering, on the other end, does he want to get that cage time? How comfortable is he going to be? He's been away for a long time now. Is he going to be wanting to just go in there, get the win, or is he going to want to get that cage time? I would expect it would be get in there, get the win, get the job done as quickly as possible, get the nerves settled. 2 years away, he might be nervous. A lot of back injuries and stuff, and 2 years is a long time to be away. The game changes quickly in MMA as well, but similar enough to Paddy Pim that this is a very winnable fight for Gunnar Nelson. When you're talking about him coming in and fighting the likes of Leon Edwards and Gilbert Burns in his last couple of fights, those are elite level fighters in the welterweight division. And Sato is obviously not one of those, but still a good fighter and a dangerous fighter on the feet as well at times. So I would expect Gunnar Nelson to just bide his time, shoot in for a double leg takedown, probably take the back of Sato, and get the submission. Rear naked choke. I'll even call the submission. The rear naked choke.
There you go. I think Gunny Nelson will probably be looking for a bit of cage time maybe in the next fight. I think this one is all about getting the win. I'm actually, you look at Sato's record it's hard to look past that 3 of his 4 losses have been by submission. When you're fighting someone as good as Gunny Nelson, that is probably not the best stat to have. But I just see here, he's training out of Sanford MMA now. I'm not sure how long he's been training out of Sanford MMA, but as we've seen here in Ireland with Ian Gary, and look at the training partners they have over there. You see him, Ian Gary, rolling with Cyborg Santos, and you see him rolling with Gilbert Burns and Vicente Luque and others there as well. I'm sure Sato is doing the same thing, and he's probably improving as well. So Gunny Nelson has been kind of stuck in Iceland for 2 years. Now there's some good training there as well, but he's not getting that level of training week in, week out. He's been injured as well, so he hasn't been getting any training week in, week out for a good while. I know he's been back a while now, and obviously he came over to Ireland, as I mentioned, and stuff. But, as you said, could Gunny Nelson be a different fighter? Like, he could be a different fighter positively, or he could be a different fighter negatively. You never know. So I'm interested to see what happens here. Whereas, with Sato, you would think he would be improving as a guy who's only, 31 years of age, relatively young. who's been fighting regularly for the last couple of years. Although he hasn't fought since November 2020. So what am I talking about? Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I agree with you as well on the feet. I think he's a similar enough fighter to Gunnar Nelson on the feet. He kind of has that sideways stance, does fight out of the southpaw stance, though, and I think it could be a fun fight on the feet. I think there'll be a lot of kicking, a lot of kind of backhands being thrown in that one.
If Sato could go in there and make it uncomfortable in the early stages of the fight, you don't know what Gunnar Nelson is going to be thinking. He might be a little bit nervous and a bit apprehensive at the start of the fight, being away for 2 years and being injured and not knowing how his body is going to respond to different things when it comes to the fight. If Sato can make it uncomfortable, that's probably the best route to his success. Try and get him out of there early if he can clip him on the feet or something like that. But I think really any sign of danger at all on the feet from Gunnar Nelson, we're going to see him drop down and take the fight down instantly, I think.
Yeah, and Sato is a finisher as well. What is it? 13 of his 15 wins have come inside of distance, 11 KO. So, you could be right there. He could be coming straight out. Like a lot of he knocked out Jason Witten around, knocked out Ben Saunders in 2 rounds, all of his, those 2 UFC wins, but all of his wins before that, a lot of them in a row, all by early knockout. So, this is an interesting fight. I'm watching a bit of Sato. I think he does look like a winnable fight for Gunnar Nelson, but looking at his record, look at some of the guys he's fought and beaten, it mightn't be as easy. So an interesting fight and a good fight to see, I suppose, where Gunnar Nelson is at this stage of his career. Right, let's move to 2 of the top prospects for me in all of the UFC, and that's Jai Herbert and Ilia Topuria. When I saw this fight was made, look, I think anyone in this side of the world who's known Jai Herbert from his Cage Warriors days is like, why is he getting so many tough matchups? It feels like every time there's a Jai Herbert fight announced, it's tougher and tougher. And I fought Trinaldo, he fought Hinato Mccann, he fought Kamawardi. He was supposed to fight someone else here. Who was it? He was supposed to fight someone really, really tough here as well. But then that person went out and he got fucking he got Ilia Topuria, which is an even tougher matchup again. So
he was supposed to fight Mike Davis, I think, in this fight. Mike Davis was forced down. That was a tough fight as well. But this is quite a tough fight as well for Jai this time around.
It's a banger of a fight. Look, the one thing as well, I must say here, Topuria is going up to 155 to take this on short notice. He was obviously at 145, but he fought for the 135-pound title in Cage Warriors. Jai Herbert actually fought the same night, if I'm not mistaken. There's going to be a big size difference here. I went back and I watched Topuria's fight against Damon Jackson earlier today, who had a great win at the weekend, and Topuria won that fight easily. But Jackson was towering above him, so I don't think he's the biggest 145er in the world. Going up to 155 with the power and the boxing prowess that Jai Herbert has, I think that could be a little bit of a problem for Topuria. And we'll get into the rest of it. On that side of it, what you think, Ian? Because it's something we don't really see often in the UFC these days, especially at these sort of weight classes. Someone with such maybe a size and power advantage. Now, we'll see how long that lasts once Topuria gets in there, because Topuria hits bloody hard as well. But a lot of people might be writing off Jai Herbert here. They really shouldn't be, should they?
Definitely not. No, I definitely think it would be foolish to write off Jai Herbert. And the biggest X factor in this fight is the jump up and weight for Ilia Topuria. He's been looking sensational in the featherweight division, and fair play to him as well for jumping up weight class. Like you said, we don't see it too often, and he's been on a hell of a tear in the featherweight division too. So he is taking a chance by moving up in weight class. I think no matter what the skill set is, once you move up that weight class, you are taking that extra little bit more of a risk going in against a bigger guy. Topuria's natural weight is probably in around 155, 160, where Jai Herbert will be in the cage. He will be much bigger. He will be much taller. And I think the key for him in this fight is to use his jab and use his length as good as he can, and as good as we've seen him do in Cage Warriors and in UFC in the past. And Topuria he will want to come in, he will want to smother him, he will want to bombard him with punches and look for the takedown and keep him guessing. I think what Jai's keys to success is distance control and the jab, and that will keep Topuria away from him in this fight. But I'm very interesting to see, on the other end of the stick for Topuria, how much has he been training himself to get down to 145? He had the missed weight in his last fight, I believe. And, we might see a new rejuvenated Ilya Topuria here. But it's a fascinating matchup. I definitely wouldn't rule out Jai Herbert, but both fighters have their hands full in different ways here in this fight.
It reminds me a little bit of the Barracks versus Mads Burnell matchup we saw last week at Bellator, where you've kind of one long, rangy guy who's going to be wanting to throw lots of combos and shots from kind of a longer distance, not even necessarily the outside. And then you'll have one guy who's wanting to come inside. Now, Topuria a little bit different than Mads Burnell. I don't think he's as much of a juggernaut or as good at jiu-jitsu. Now, he has good jiu-jitsu on the ground, don't get me wrong. And I actually think he might look for a couple of takedowns here, but what he will be looking for is shots to the body, coming up inside, body, head, things like that, combinations inside. This has fun fire written all over it. Really, really has. It's one of those fights that I hope it doesn't end early. I kind of want to see 3 rounds of this. It's one of those fights. And I think you broke it down perfectly there about what Jai Herbert needs to do and what Topuria needs to do as well. I'd be interested to see, look, Topuria has beaten as I mentioned, Damon Jackson. He's beaten Ryan Hall. Those guys that we saw Damon Jackson the weekend, he's talking about fighting Edson Barboza. He's talking about ranked guys. Ryan Hall was ranked in that fight, if I'm not mistaken, although it's a year ago now nearly. So things change a lot in a year. But it'd be interesting to see if he does move away from that division. That Ryan Hall fight, I'm pretty sure, was on short notice as well, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see if if Topuria does make a home at 155 or if he goes back down. Like, if he loses, he's probably going straight back down. If he wins, you never know. But this, to me, like, this is fight at night written all over it if it goes those 3 rounds, and I really, really hope it does. But what an absolute banger of a fight. I think if you don't know, if you probably know Topuria, if you don't know Jai Herbert, I think you should know him. He's a way better fighter than his record in the UFC suggests, and this one should be fun. Right, the last fight we're going to talk about in depth is the co-main event. We leave the main event. The lads have already done, I think, the preview. So please go and listen to that with Shillian and Duffy. They've broken down the whole card. So we're kind of looking at it here from more of a European or local point of view. And, we'll touch on Aspinall in a second towards the end, and we'll touch on 1 or 2 other fighters. But I want to talk about Arlen Allen versus Dan Hooker. What a fight this is. Instead of a fighter going from featherweight up to lightweight, we have a fighter coming from lightweight down to featherweight. And Dan Hooker, obviously, he's fought there before. But one thing I noticed, and I'm interested to get your thoughts on it, when I look at Arnold Allen, and it's hard, why is Arnold Allen? Why is it always hard for me to say that? I don't know why. I just look at his strength. He is such a strong fighter, and there's lots of other things. He's one of the most well-rounded fighters in that division. Make no mistake about it. Good wrestler, good jiu-jitsu, good striking, hits hard, can take a shot. But he is so strong. Like, he picked up Sadiq Yusuf and he put him on the ground easier than I've ever seen anyone doing it. And, if people don't know, his father is like a strong man, isn't he? So I'm sure that, it's a bit genetic more than anything else as well. But talk to us about Arlen Allen. I feel like we know Dan Hooker. We don't need to talk that much about Dan Hooker. Everyone's seen 10, 15 Dan Hooker fights at this stage. Tell us about Arlen Allen. What do you think of him as a fighter, and how good do you think he can be?
I looked back at a couple of Arnold Allen's fights, and I've seen his progression throughout his career as well. And I would honestly have the opinion that Arnold Allen probably would be the most complete fighter we've ever seen out of the UK ever so far. Like you said, some really good striking, really strong wrestling, great grappling as well. Like look at the muscles on his back there. His back is huge, and to go in there, he was a little bit tired at the end of the Yusuf fight, but Yusuf is as strong as a bull in there. We've not seen Yusuf being handled the way he got handled in the grappling exchanges, and also hurt him multiple times on the feet as well. Has a beautiful left hand and has a beautiful left kick that follows that left hand as well. He'll get you thinking about that left straight, but then he disguises that head kick. Those are his 2 greatest weapons on the feet that I've been most impressive with. He's just a complete package, fighting out a TriStar. You can see the mold that Faraz Sahabi is mold, the fighter he's molding him into, reminiscent of some GSP aspects, light on the feet, strong in the wrestling exchanges. And just to reiterate what I said again, honestly, one of the most complete fighters I've ever seen coming out of the UK.
Yeah, he's up there with Alistair Overeem as the UK's greatest ever fighter, definitely. But I would agree. And I think we've actually talked about this a little bit before, and it's hard to disagree with that. Look, obviously Bisping is right up there as well, and I probably think a few more Brad Pickett and the likes. But I would agree. I think he's the best as well. He's absolutely fantastic. But this is a real test. Now he's had some good tests. He's fought Yusuf. He's fought Gilbert Melendez. Beating Mads Burnell. We saw how good Mads Burnell was last weekend, and he's beaten others as well along the way. But this is a big test against someone who he's used to fighting bigger guys, stronger guys. He fought Islam Makayev in his last fight to Dan Hooker. He beat Nasrat Hakparas, who I believe is he gone up to 170 now? I don't know, but he's a bigger guy anyway. He's beaten Felder, beaten Naya Quinta, beaten James Vick, beaten Gilbert Burns, for God's sake. Arguably the second best welterweight in the world, maybe the third or fourth, but one of them anyway. This is a real test for Arlen Allen, and if he can pass this, I can't see him being too far away from a title shot. You never know what's going to happen with Max Holloway, and obviously the Korean Zombie versus Volkanovski is coming up here as well. But this is a massive fight for him. I think it should be main event personally. I think this is the best fight on the top of the card. This is the most high-level fight on the card. And we've seen some unbelievable featherweight fights. We saw the Burnell fight last week against Barrocks. We saw Yusuf and Caceres wasn't great, but we have this weekend coming up. We've Paul Hughes versus Vucinic as well for the Unified Cage Warriors title, and then we have an unbelievable week for the featherweight division all around the world, and I really can't wait to see that. So those are kind of the four fights to me that stick out here, and we'll mention one or two other couple of things before we go. The main event, let's mention that quickly, and Tom Aspinall. Ian, do you think it's a little bit quick for Tom Aspinall? Do you think they've moved him right? Do you think the matchmaking by the UFC has been good to get him in there? He's only 13 fights into his career. We've seen it what happened with Francis. They've moved him too quickly. We've seen it happen with Cyril Gane. They moved him too quickly. Okay, he's beaten Arlovsky. He's beaten Spivak. And he's won, 4 fights in a row now in the UFC. But is it the right time? And is this the right matchup?
It's a question that I'd probably be able to answer a little bit better after the fight happens.
Sunday, that's me on Sunday.
Yeah. But I think in probably moving him up, I wouldn't have minded him seeing maybe fighting a lower ranked opponent. But in order to make this the main event they wanted, they've thrown him in there with Volkov, a former champion, a very experienced fighter. A guy who has faced adversities and is massively experienced. And for Tom, he's impressed me a lot in his UFC tenure so far. Like, really impressive boxing. Obviously, he's had some previous boxing experience, but shows some killer instinct on the feet, shows some killer instinct if the fight hits the mat. We've seen that in the Arlovsky fight. And, I think it is the right time. Because I think it is the right time now, because even if it's not the right time, he'll have a chance to bounce back, if you know what I'm saying, that kind of way.
Yeah.
If it is too much too soon for him, he'll find out on Saturday night. But you know what? There's going to be plenty of time for him to come back. And he's only 28, Tom Aspinall. He'll have time to reassess things. He'll have time to get back in there and make a run. But I do think that Tom Aspinall has championship material, has championship quality about him. And I'm excited to see how he goes in there against a very experienced Volkov on Saturday night.
I agree. I definitely think he has championship potential. And I didn't until his last few fights. I mean, not that I didn't, but I wasn't convinced totally until his last 2 fights. But I am convinced now. And that's why I think they should maybe being a little bit too careful, or a little bit more careful with him. But as you say, come back to us on Sunday and we'll talk about that again. 2 people I really want to mention as well. Molly Mccann, big fight for her against Luana Carolina. Molly was on a 2-fight losing streak until she won her last one. Great win. Molly always rises her game when she's fighting in front of the home fans. I'm sure with Paddy fighting here as well, there will be a large contingent down from Liverpool to London for this card, and they'll be there early, and she will be getting a large reception here. And Paul Craig is another one I have to mention, because this guy might be the most underestimated fighter, not underrated necessarily, but underestimated fighter in the UFC. Last week, who do we see winning? Ankalaev. He's had 1 loss in his career, and who is it? Paul Craig. A couple of weeks before that, we saw Jamahal Hill. He's 1 loss in his career. Who is it? Paul Craig. Give this guy some respect. He deserves it. And he's got in there against Nikita Krylov, a guy who's not had the best time in the world on the ground before. And if Paul Craig can catch him in a little bit of a dirty armbar or a triangle, you know, he mightn't have a great time again. So massive fight for Craig. I think if he wins it, he should be vaulted up that division. He absolutely deserves it. So that's one I definitely want to watch out for. Ian, tell us about Muhammad Makayev. You cover obviously a lot of the amateur scene on your podcast, The Owl Triangle. This guy, would you say he's the greatest amateur fighter of all time?
100%. I mean, without question, Muhammad Makayev is unbelievable talent. Had a phenomenal amateur record. I mean, he was undefeated at an amateur level. He won 22 or over 22 fights at amateur level. Multiple time IMAF world champion. Has come into the pro scene and has looked really good. Really solid fighter. Strong grappler, strong wrestler, confident on the feet, confident in his abilities, and look at, he's going to be a major player here in the UFC. And I think, you know, this is a good fight for him against Cody Durden. There's a bit of smack talk about some racist comments and this and that, and he's looking to get in there. He's got his chance to get in there now, make a point. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of Muhammad Makayev in the UFC. I think he's a major player and a phenomenal talent overall. And if you don't know him, check him out. Look back at a couple of his amateur fights. There's plenty of fights out there. He's been very successful so far in his professional career as well. And I'm very excited to see his progress in the UFC.
Yeah, he beat Blaine O'Driscoll, who was the Irish Fighter of the Year 2 years ago in his last fight over in Brave. So he's very, very talented. He's a guy, I think he's only 21, 22 years of age. Still has lots of improvements to do, as any 21, 22-year-old would do, but he's a dominating wrestler and he doesn't care when he comes forward. He hits hard because he has that wrestling background. Very talented guy. You have to be tuning in for this fight. Mike Grundy and Mccann, as well as, you know, a good kind of mid-level featherweight fight, I would say. Both guys probably fighting for their jobs over the next couple of fights. So that's a big one for them. Corey McKenna against Elise Reed. I think that's a good fight for McKenna there. I think she should be winning that. And the last two guys I want to mention here, two guys who kind of came up at different steps, but around the same time through Cage Warriors, Jack Shore and Nathaniel Wood. I remember seeing Nathaniel Wood fighting here in Ireland against Alan Philpott all the way back in 2016 and watching a few of his fights. And, you know, he didn't have the best record in the world at that time, although what was he, like 7 or 8-2 maybe, or something like that, or 10-2 maybe. And Alan Philpott beat him. And I remember thinking, this guy is going to end up in the UFC and this guy is going to end up a very, very good fighter. And he's won an absolute ball of fights since then. Okay, he lost to Casey Kenny, he lost to John Dodson. And the Casey Kenny fight was relatively close last time, but he's beaten Andre Ewell, beaten John Castaneda. This is a big fight for him, and for Jack Shore too, 15-0 now in his career. He's some good wins, beating Hunter Azor, beating Aaron Phillips after his UFC debut against Nolene Hernandez. These two guys are kind of, I think, especially Jack Shore at the moment, maybe 1 or 2 big wins away from getting to a level where he's getting a name to push up the rankings. I think it's a big time for both. What are your thoughts on both Shore and Nathaniel Wood?
Two phenomenal talents. Like, you know, like you, I was really excited for Nathaniel Wood when he entered into the UFC. I saw some facets of his game where I thought he was going to make a real run when he got in there. Now, things haven't worked out for him in some aspects. You know, he's lost against Dodson, was unlucky. I thought he was winning that fight until he got clipped. You know, he learned from that. Casey Kenny is a decent fighter as well. I mean, there's no shame losing against someone like Casey Kenny either. But, you know, this is his chance to get back in there, get back in the win column, start putting another run together. And I think that, you know, if he gets a couple of things right, he will be able to put a run together and he will be able to move up the rankings there in the bantamweight division. So, you know, Vince Morales is a tough opponent as well. He's beat Lou Smoka in his last fight, which is no joke either. Lou Smoka is a pretty decent fighter, but, you know, I think, yeah, this is it. It's make or break for Nathaniel Wood here now. He needs to start putting something together. He needs to get a few wins together and make a drive up the bantamweight division for for Jack Shore, like you said, I feel one or two more wins, and we're probably going to see Jack Shore in the position where Arnold Allen is now, and that would be in a main event or a headline event, possibly in another UK card down the line or something like that. A really good, solid fighter from Wales. He's like tough as nails, like all the Welsh fighters. I mean, really solid all around. Comes forward, like never stops. Work rate is unbelievable. Just as tough as they come is Jack Shore, and he's on a good run, and he's kind of flying somewhat in under the radar there. Like at 15-0, he needs to get in there, start making a few statement wins, and make people start talking his name, and make people realize how good of a fighter he is, because he is a really, really good fighter.
Yeah, and he's probably that one guy on that undercard who you should be watching. He is a very, very good fighter. I'm looking forward to seeing his performance at the weekend. As you said, the matchup isn't the easiest in the world leader. I know Makayev is coming in on short notice, I believe. So fair play to him for taking the fight. He's 20 fights in his career, won 18 of them. So that's not going to be easy, absolutely. So, yeah, looking forward to all those fights at the weekend. Big weekend, as I said, for European MMA. Ian, thank you very much for joining me. If you want to follow Ian, he's over on Twitter at @IO'Neil MMA. Subscribe to the Owl Triangle podcast. It's available everywhere there. Ian does a great job every few weeks with his co-hosts breaking down the Irish MMA scene and all that. So no better man to do it. And thank you to everybody for listening and watching. My name is Sean Sheehan for Sherdog.com. And I'll see you all next time.